Okay.
All right.
All right. Good Monday afternoon to everybody. So hopefully we will be joined by Councilmember Patterson is not on here either, is he?
He's here. He's just hiding.
Oh, okay. All righty. Would you put the agenda up, please, Katie? Okay. And what I want, actually, I think what I want you to do, well, you all see the agenda, but we're gonna put up the piece that's addressing the first item on our agenda. And I did it that way because this item may take a little longer than committee reports, especially since we just had our council committee meeting. So we should be pretty well caught up with that. So let's go to the housing stabilization thing and just chat about that. And I can tell you what my hope is, that we can come out with something, some kind of agreement or willingness to move forward with at least a couple of things on this platform, if not more. But I think we've got to move it. There's a saying that people use, I can't use on here, but it's like what you either do something or you get off the pot. Well, that's where we are. We need to do something or get off the pot. So and I appreciate for those of you who sent in your comments in terms of what your thinking is for each of these. I call them planks. Councilmember Pio calls them demands, but I think it's a platform and it has these planks. So let me just get my door right quick.
I didn't call them demands. The tenant association called them demands. I'm just reiterating what they said.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So, rent stabilization, Councilman. So let's talk. We see well the comments in favor and the issue about methodology. Sort of getting to that, what does anyone see as an alternative to address where we are with the methodology? And I did send out that additional explanation that I had requested regarding that. Is there any way to ameliorate what you believe would be the results of having flawed methodology for this?
You're talking about for the vacancy survey?
Second?
Are you talking about for the vacancy survey methodology?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think, we have one example, which is to assume no vacancy if the landlord doesn't reply. And I know that they gave, in the decision, they gave an example of one city that did that and were sued, but then, the higher court overturned the decision, and I forget what they called it, like a common sense rule.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some precedent for doing that.
Okay, are there any other thoughts in that regard? Do you recall what the timeline was for completing the survey as it's presently constructed?
I thought I heard that it was just going to be a couple more weeks, but I don't have the official timeline.
I can look back. I know it was mentioned in one of the, it might have been mentioned in that NBD quarterly where the sound wasn't great for people zooming in. So I can circle back and find that out.
So with the court throwing out or allowing the whatever city that did that to advance, was that the end of that argument? Since it's been done and tested, how far along the test is it in the zero vacancy thing?
That's a good question. I don't think that we got that information, but if the higher court agreed that
Right.
it's okay, then, you know, I don't know if there's another appeal going.
Yeah. Okay. So that whole activity is related to trying to get to rent control, though, right? And I guess my point is it's important, but it's not critical to some of the stuff that we're trying to do right now. So let's move on to the next one.
I do think it's good information, you know, to understand the vacancy, if we have a vacancy emergency. You know, I think
You're breaking up. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to put in my headphones too. But it's determining a vacancy emergency, which I think is good information.
But it's not critical in terms of having an immediate impact.
Well, if we don't have a vacancy emergency, then we can't go further in the process with the ETPA.
Right. And that process, as I understand it, those includes consideration about rent control.
Right.
So we're not there with that. We can argue about the results of the vacancy study and see if we want to push back and look at the zero vacancy thing. I'm not sure about that. So how about the good cause eviction protection? You all that my thinking is this one may be easier than some of the others. You're thinking on this? Let me see.
I could jump in.
Okay.
Generally speaking, I think good cause protections for the most part are standard practice in a lot of or in most organizations that have HUD funding, have federal funding, and have affordable housing. So I think this is really extending those protections, those same protections that already exist in our city, to other landlords. I think it provides clarity in terms of making it a lot clearer than it currently is on what could constitute an eviction and what could not. And I do think it will help with some of our landlord tenant situations that we've seen even pre-pandemic. I do think that there's some questions about its implementation if we were to pass it. And I think those are separate issues that we'd have to work through. But in general, I'm supportive of trying to move something along in this vein.
Okay. The one of the concerns that I had, I think it is captured on the next bullet about increasing rent. Having personally been involved in trying to help someone who was a victim of having a new property owner come in, and the rent went up from $500 or $600 a month to $1,500 because it hadn't gone up previously, but then the landlord hadn't done anything on the property, so he really needed to do some work on the property, but he also wanted to bring it up to market levels, which makes sense. So, and I think we had someone who came to council with a similar story. That's my only concern with regard to the associated rent increases with something like this and how we can guard against that.
When you say, I didn't understand if you are concerned that landlords won't be able to raise their rent or guard against tenants having a rent increase like you described.
I think it's both, because if in the case that I referenced, the property owner these people lived there for 15 years and they paid the same rent. But of course, the property owner didn't do anything to it. His son assumed ownership of the property and he said, oh, what's going on here? You know, this is valued much more than this and this place is falling down. So you got to move 30 days. So that part of it was egregious enough, but then to say, well, you could stay if you go from 500 or 600 to 1,500. So the provisions that we're talking about with the increases, I guess you can put there's something in there about that, I believe, but that's the only part that's uncomfortable to me. I would really need to know how we address something like that, but beyond that, I do think that we ought to be able to move with good cause eviction.
Yeah, I think that, you know, because this isn't rent control, it's just like a defense in court, you know, it would be up to the judge to decide whether or not it's unconscionable or if the rent increase is to try and get around the good cause stipulation. So, you know, landlords could, you know, if we had good cause and landlord rose it, you know, from 800 to 1,500, essentially that's, you know, giving the tenant no option. And so I think that's why this clause is important. But it also, you know, if the landlord has a good reason, like this property has been in disrepair, I need to clear it out in order to rehab, that's, you know, I think that's up to the judge, but I think it's reasonable to say that, okay, you do need to get someone out. But I think in this instance, raising the rent without doing the repairs is unconscionable. You know, if he says you can stay, but I need to get 1,500 for it, he hasn't done the work to justify it. Does that make sense?
It does. Where do we factor in the concept of market value?
Well, I think
where does that, because it's not.
Yeah, I think, you know, the increasing, you know, if someone comes in and something is below market value, you know, it's not my thinking is it's not the tenant's fault. And a stepped increase over a period of years, to me seems fair to get it up to market value. And I've seen instances of that in the community. And if you're a good tenant, you know, that they'd like to keep you, they kind of step it up until you eventually get there. So it gives the person some time to one, figure out if they want to find more income in order to stay or to find something else.
So I've heard from council members Lupian and Melinda. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this?
I can jump in with my 2 cents here.
Please do.
I've been hearing that it hardly ever happens that a landlord increases rent on their own on a building that they currently own. It's always when they sell it that the new landlord comes in and jacks up the rents. I think that's the vast majority of the time that you see that increase of rent, which President Scott, you brought up as well, where someone new comes in and says, whoa, what is going on here? These rents are way too low. This is not where it's supposed to be. Well, this new business owner is not going to run the business the same way as the previous business owner. And keep in mind, this is a business. So when we're talking about, you know, impeding on business owners on what they can charge, we swore an oath to the Constitution, and then business owners have rights and tenants, they have rights as well. But, you know, we have to stick to the Constitution here, and the homeowner has the rights to the home. So if they wish to increase the rents on a building that they just purchased, yeah, I can say that that's not conscionable, that's not right, but it's well within their rights.
I don't think that this is unconstitutional, or it would have been struck down as such. And, it's well within the government's right to regulate businesses and industry like we have with, and we have worker protections. I don't see it as much different than tenant protections. We have to protect the rights of our citizens to have a home that they can afford. And to your point about the owners jacking up raising the rents, there are owners that without selling will raise the rent because the market value has increased in the area. But to your point that it does switch owners, I think that's true. But the tenants who have lived there the whole time, the house didn't change, from owner to owner. The market around it changed. And the tenants who have been there through the whole time, and a lot of these houses have been kept without in uninhabitable conditions. And that's why the landlord hasn't raised the rent. They call that naturally occurring affordable housing. But for the new person to come in and say, oh, well, now this area has improved in value, all the other houses around it, I don't think that gives them the right to charge more. Does that make sense?
I see what you're saying. Like, I agree that it's not right. But when you say it doesn't give them the right to, from a constitutional standpoint, I can't agree with that. They do have the right to. It's not right. I don't agree with it. But if I buy a house, a building of 50 units and all the rents were really low compared to where it is now, as a business owner, I'm going to say, look, I would love to keep everybody here. I'm sure that's what most women would do. I would love to keep everybody here, but these rents just do not constitute where they should be. And I agree. If you've been living there for 15 years, that's a tough pill to swallow. I'm not okay. I'm personally not okay with it. But I'd hate to also say, why didn't they purchase the house then at that point? 15 years running in the same place is a long time. I would love to see if we can help the landlords to keep the rents low. So incentivize them to keep the rents low as opposed to, striking them down when they do. If we say, hey, if you keep the rents at this price, I don't know if there's a way we can help pay a difference or something, or some way of incentivizing them to keep the rents low. I think there can be an agreement there where it doesn't impede on constitutional rights.
That really sort of gets to the core of one of the things that it always sort of nudges me about. We hear the phrase, housing is a human right. Well, I don't necessarily disagree, but I think when we talk about who has to provide that right, the direction we're going is to make the market provide it. And that somehow doesn't feel quite right, because you can't, food is a human right, but you can't go into Wegmans and grab a bag of groceries and walk out. But government, we need to be on point for responding to that right. And what you just described gets to that. I think it's sort of, if there's a way we could build in something like that.
I think there was a pilot in the Susan B. Anthony neighborhood where I don't exactly know how it worked, but somehow the landlords were subsidized for providing affordable rents. And I think that that's interesting, looking at maybe a tax break or a subsidy for providing affordable rents. But I still think that we have to prevent the rents from rising so rapidly. Landlords that rent from like in the middle range, not like the super high end and not the low end, but in the middle range, the market gives them 2 to 3%. Their ability to raise the rents is about 2 to 3% a year. Where we're seeing the biggest increases at the low end of the spectrum. And, just from what are we here for, right? We're to provide the common good for our citizens. And, the business owners, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but the majority of them don't live here. And many of them live out of state, out of country. And so we're talking about safeguarding, people that are benefiting from our citizens and taking that money out of Rochester, as opposed to providing for the citizens that live here and for the benefit of our city. And, again, prove to me that this isn't constitutional, because if it weren't, it would have been struck down. So I think we're well within our rights to regulate this portion of the industry.
Dr. Gruber, you've been really quiet.
Once in a while. Yeah,
Okay.
I ultimately, I agree with a large portion of what you said, Loretta and Miguel, in the sense that these are, Miguel in particular talked about how these are standards that, a huge amount of the housing stock in Rochester is already responsible for. And I think that there's, I'm 100% on board with moving forward in this direction. I just think that the questions that you asked, and even what Miguel said, that the implementation and the enforcement of leave some questions. The devil's in the details. And I just think that that is the work that really needs to be done. I'd love to hear about, I've wanted for the last couple of months to try to figure out how we can talk to the administration and city council in Albany to understand the specifics, because this is probably a very long conversation that they had in Albany. But I'd like to get there. I'd like to move forward. But those individual questions about, frankly, how we implement it, how we enforce it, what the connectivity is with the enforcement mechanisms, those are. And I think someone in this document raised it. I'm not sure if it's on this page. Oh, but someone said that a judge has discretion over what's considered reasonable, unreasonable. Those are the big questions. What is the legislative action that we can take to make sure it's that we define these things as well as we can for Rochester. But I'd be thrilled to continue this conversation. I think it's something that we ought to be doing.
Okay.
And I just to step in there too, I do agree that we have we need to increase the amount of low rent, low income housing. I do believe that there's a way to increase that amount without impeding on the landlords, because I feel as though the local landlords, when we put more on them, and it's already hard to, get rid of the I don't want to say bad tenants, but the tenants that aren't upkeeping their units. When we impede on them some more, you're already seeing it, they're gonna jump ship quickly. And what Mary was talking about with foreign investors, they're gonna buy these up real quick, because $100,000 is nothing to them. And when they buy it up, that's gonna increase the housing stock that's just gonna sit in blight or get worse because they don't care. So I wanna make sure we really help out our local landlords. I'm in complete agreement that there is not enough low-income housing. I agree wholeheartedly, but how to implement some of these changes, I think that's where we can work together to find where we can help the landlords to stay where they are, because a lot of them they have tax bills that are coming up that they can't pay, and we need our tax revenues as a city. So what can we do to help? That's the big thing.
Councilmember Patterson.
Okay, so Councilmember Gruber, are you of the opinion that the majority of the housing in Rochester is provided by government? Did I freeze?
No, he's on mute.
Yes, he's on mute.
He's on mute. I shared that today. He's still on mute.
I think he's having an issue with his audio.
Okay. So I guess, so this question is for everybody. Does everybody believe that housing is currently a right?
Yes, I believe that.
No, currently you believe that housing is a right.
I think it's a right.
A human
Codified
right.
in law.
A human
No,
right.
but is it, I mean, no. We're lawmakers, folks. Is
Right.
it a right codified in law somewhere? Is housing a right?
It's
No.
not codified in law. No.
Okay. So then it is not a right. It should be a right. We can agree it should be a right, but it's not a right, right?
I think
Can
it's up
we
to
agree
us
that
to
it-
codify
agree.
it.
Well, no. Just work with me. Can we agree? Do we agree? Do we understand that housing is not a right? We do understand that it is not codified in law at the federal level, at the state level. It's not a right. Do we agree with that?
Yes. That
Okay.
it's not codified. Yes.
Okay. Do we agree that it should be codified?
Yes.
Okay. So if we codify housing as a right, who has the responsibility to provide housing?
What, some level of government. That's the way I
Okay.
feel about it.
I agree. Okay. But no level of government, and when I say you have the responsibility to provide it, that means if somebody can't pay, then government agrees to pay.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Well, the closest thing we have to that is the Rochester Housing Authority. That is the closest thing that we have to a codified structure, guaranteed housing. Doesn't come close to meeting the need. We all agree with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just want to put that out there. So the next thing is this. Mary, you keep talking about out-of-town landlords. Do you propose that we only legislate around out-of-town landlords or all landlords?
I suppose if we did offer a tax break or incentives, we could limit it to local landlords. That's a possibility.
So we want to treat one class of landlords differently than another class of landlords? That's your belief. We should treat one group of landlords, regardless of based upon where the landlord resides, we should treat them differently.
No, I'm offering suggestions because you're going down this line of questioning.
Okay, I'm just asking. Okay, so would you say yes or no? We should look at treating landlords differently based upon where they live. I mean, because to some degree we already do. If you live within the city of Rochester or within a distance within the city of Rochester, we don't ask that you have a property manager contact, things along those lines. So that is something that we do, but you would want to expand that. Yes, no? Think about it. Okay. So, and to Miguel's point about the requirements for subsidized housing, those requirements are, I would say it like this. Those requirements are basically an exchange for consideration. So so for a pile of money, low interest loan, you agree to adopt these standards. Isn't that pretty much how that works, Councilmember Melendez?
Yes, that is.
Okay. So are we proposing to do something similar if we are going to, so is the proposal before us to do something similar to the private landlords?
Don't have the answer to that question. I will
That's
say
fair.
that I will say this though. I think that the exchange, for the most part, in my mind, is common sense exchange in terms of good cause. I feel in the housing industry, it provides clearer understanding of what constitutes an allowable eviction. And without that, I think we have a lot of things that are happening that are left to interpretation. So that would
Well,
be my
that's
counter argument.
but that's the affordable housing industry, which is a totally different thing than the market rate housing industry. Can we agree with that?
We can agree with that.
Okay. All right. So there's that. All right. So trying to limit rents. So I hate to just say it like this, but if housing is not a right, and it currently is not a right outside of our housing authority and your ability to access that, then and that has limitations on the maximum amount that an individual can pay for rent, and it has an element of it that extends out into the private market through the Section 8 program. How do you? I guess I'm at a loss for this aversion to capitalism. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm heartless, but at the same time, it sounds as though one or others of you were saying, well, if a landlord can get more money for an area, for a unit, that we should limit how much they can get. And I guess the other side of that is, that's the kind of thinking that is limiting right now the supply of housing in our market. And Jose was in this meeting, so he should be able to chime in on this. We were having a meeting with the landlords about the landlord registry. Well, not the program that we're working on with those guys around registering property managers and all that stuff. And one of the things that was brought up is that we currently have units that are available to rent that landlords refuse to rent. Why do landlords refuse to rent these units? They refuse to rent these units because they're basically managing their loss at this time. And what that means is this: they don't, for the most part, have access to court to remove a tenant who isn't paying for whatever reason because of COVID. So what they're doing is they have units that are available, but because they see it as such a risky environment that we're in right now, they would rather take the loss of not renting the unit and knowing that they're not getting paid, but also knowing that the unit's not going to be roughed up or anything along those lines. They're sitting on the sidelines with units. So there's that challenge there. And there were a couple of landlords in that meeting who said, yeah, I'm actually doing that right now. So we have a concern. So we have an issue out here in our community. I don't know how large it is, of landlords who have available units, but because of what's going on in our court system right now, they're literally afraid to rent them. So they're just holding them, and they're just holding them. They're just not renting them because they don't see that they can win. Where I'm going with this is this. Look, whatever we're thinking about doing, trying to do, it is going to have an impact on our market. And one of the, and when you're in the second year of a global pandemic where markets have been severely disrupted across the community, I think we need to slow down and take a little bit more time to think about what we're trying to do or what it is that we think we want to do. One of my concerns, quite frankly, is the Cfo argument, which seems to be, if you don't have a Cfo now, then you can simply say as a tenant, I don't have to pay the rent. Well, the way our housing courts work, if you allege that there's a habitability issue with the unit, you go before a judge, and the judge determines the degree to which they will reduce the rent that is owed. But at no time does the rent simply disappear because there is a lack of a document that needed to be provided by government. So is that what we are looking to create now in the city of Rochester? If
Actually,
there is
Michael,
a document? No,
that's
just
actually in the code.
Okay, well,
The
are you
code
sure?
says if there's no Cfo, you cannot collect rent. Yes, I'm sure.
The city of Rochester code says that?
That's what it says.
Because Because if that's the case, then that should be enforceable in court now, so we don't need to pass any legislation. You just told,
No,
so you're
this
basically,
is not evicting. So they're not allowed to collect rent, but this is, if you don't have a C of O, you can't evict that tenant. So they're two different things.
well, in many instances, the reason for the eviction is because you hadn't paid the rent. So how is it that, so how is it that that doesn't hold up in court? If that is something that exists now, and you're telling me it already exists in the code, then we probably don't need to legislate on this, because if you're failing, if you're evicting for not paying the rent, but you can't collect the rent, you're telling me our code says you can't collect rent because you don't have a CFO, then that should already have been tested in court. Has it been tested?
I don't know. But I
Okay.
will say
Well,
that, if it already exists in our code, what's the harm in issuing legislation to clarify?
Well, you don't need to clarify it. If that is the case, it already exists in the law. So let's get it tested, because I don't know, Mary. Send me if it exists in code where it says right now in the City of Rochester code that if you don't have a C of O that you can't collect the rent, please send me that code reference.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
I believe it says may not collect rent.
Send me the code reference. Because I think we also need to expand this conversation. This might not be a bad time for us to have to see if we can get together with somebody, with one of the judges who handle this, and help them give us their perspective. I met with a judge recently on another issue, and they have a different perspective on a fair number of issues as the people who sit down and deal with these issues on a one-on-one basis. And it was enlightening. So I've got some other questions to go back and work with to ask around another issue that's not this issue, but
Well,
I get it. I mean, I get it. People feel. I get it. People
Okay,
feel.
let us go back to Councilmember Gruber's suggestion that we confer with, I think it's Albany, who has already implemented this kind of legislation, and they could walk us through, because some of the questions, there are some questions we probably don't even have because we don't know enough about it. So can that be our next action on this, with some level of immediacy? Because I'm really just tired of bouncing this thing around. That if we can meet with them and those questions that we've raised, I think we can pose to them too. If they've gone there, we're in New York State. They're in New York State. They ran up against what we will run up against. So can we have that as our next immediate action with regard to this?
Madam President, the only thing I'll add on this is that, and I mentioned this to the group that brought these proposals before us, is that I'd like to get some type of some stuff on the legal side. And I say that only because we just don't have any money to be spending on legal challenges and all types of other stuff. So we want to make sure that anything that we do, that we can defend it if it's challenged and that type of thing. So there are some different legal opinions on this type of stuff, but I think that it's very necessary to make sure that if it's shared from someone else who's gone down this path or other things, but for us to get an independent legal analysis, and maybe a city law department can do that, or others, to see what some of the legal ramifications may be, if any. But I think that will be very important before we, as we proceed on continuing to have these type of conversations.
Councilmember Lupian, you submitted a proposal about legislation. Was it for that? Frankly, I just didn't get a chance to read through it. Was it on this or something else? Was it on this one?
Do you mean the legislation?
Yeah.
That covers good cause, and I have it up here. It wasn't mine, that came from the tenant union, but it covers the not renewing the tax incentive.
Yeah,
Let me,
okay,
I'll put it in the chat.
okay.
But it's predominantly good cause.
So we can have that, we can confer with Albany, and then that also can help to inform our conversation or questions to law, because we don't know all of the questions. We don't know what we're going to run up against. So if we could sort that out and then get and consult with law or somebody who has the knowledge about the legal implications, and put a timeline on our actions so that we don't float with this. Yeah, we really got to move it.
I do think that Albany is not a good comparison in terms of the legal justification, because they have housing court in their charter before the unified court system was enacted statewide. And so that's why, they were able to, their justification for doing the eviction moratorium, where we felt like we couldn't. But there are other cities to compare with.
In New York?
Mhm.
Okay, well, whichever is the most appropriate comparison. So are we okay with that? And I don't know what a reasonable timeline is, but we shouldn't have to go more than another month on this. We really have to say, well, we're just not gonna look at it any further, or we're gonna work this thing out. We're gonna do it quickly.
The only question I'd have is if enough time has passed to see the unintended consequences of the actions as well. So if it just passed, I'm not sure if we're going to see that quite yet. That's the only input I'd have on that. But I'm interested to see
what
if they pass something similar to this. Then if it just happened, we may not have enough time to see what the unintended consequences of it are. So
okay, they who?
Whatever city we come up with that has passed.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to keep that in mind. Okay. So what about
Loretta? I would just suggest. I had technical difficulties before. I would just suggest that I think we should have that conversation as soon as possible. I think we should have had it months ago at this point, and I think it should include their corporation counsel. I mean, I think it could include someone from our law department, or maybe Linda is willing to sit in with us. But I think one of the ways that we can make sure that the conversation is as impactful and effective as possible, so we don't have to go back and have it again, by having all those folks involved.
Okay.
The tenant union has been working with a lawyer from New York City out of Law New York, and it may be beneficial to have her be a part of that as well, in terms of the legal justification.
All right. We'll get to work on that today. I'll try and line some folk up, get that on the schedule. Okay, what was the other one?
I have a question for clarification for scheduling. Does everyone still have that Wednesday hold on their calendar?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't, but I can work with it.
I can try to put it back on yours, because that would be good, because we do have a lot of work sessions already. But if that's a good time, I can work around.
Okay. Okay, so on the Cfo no eviction law, there is some, if not confusion, discord regarding what that actually says or does. Let's see. Let's go down a little further so I can see. City court. So that this one is seems like a no-brainer, but then when you look at the buts, how do we begin to address that?
Well, we already have the pilot that
Mhm.
we in the county funded.
Right? And that's
But-
being paid for out of, is that one of the biggest issues that we're gonna have, though? Who's gonna pay for it?
I mean, I didn't think it was that much money. Maybe it was 600,000 for the year.
We're talking about the right to counsel now.
Yeah.
I would love to hear from the legal organizations that were providing the counsel. I'd love to hear an update from them if it's something that, you know, if they, because they help scope that work and that contract. And so I think we have to make sure they have capacity to expand it, but I think it makes a lot of sense.
I don't know if they need to expand it. Well, I mean, they need to continue it. We have in the notes from the Justice for All Coalition last week, they talked about it in depth. But basically, you know, if the funding runs out, everything they built will be gone.
Another problem I believe with this is that since the skip court is ending, which was like the specialized
Right.
part, the problem is not necessarily money, it's that they don't have enough people to be physically at all the different courthouses since it's no longer centralized. And so that is where the importance of the housing court comes in, because then it would at least be in a central spot and you could put advocates there to help people that come without counsel. And so that's the disconnect there.
And I think they're asking for elected officials to write in support of keeping the specialized housing part for, you know, I think the duration of the pandemic, but and hopefully by then the state will have acted on the housing court.
Yeah, I know that there should be a draft coming our way for that.
What do we need to do?
We will need to sign on to it. And I don't think it would hurt to talk to, if we wanted, Judge Doran, because I know, and it says it in here, that he's in support of, you look puzzled.
Well, when we first started meeting with him, he was in the position of supervising judge or something like that. But he was really cooperative and engaged. Is he in the same capacity now?
I know that they have asked that he still oversee everything going on with housing. That's correct, right, Mary? Because he has like he's been really important in that, so they don't want
Right.
to lose any of that. So he will still be the main contact for that.
Okay. All right, so we need to meet with him. Is that in order to? But what is the position that we are advocating? Does that mean that we're looking at having to pay for some of this, or what?
I think right now, just to clarify, we are talking about both Cfo and right to counsel because they go hand in hand.
Mhm.
And since the kind of what Councilmember Gruber was saying, it would be nice to hear from the entities providing the legal counsel, since that has so much to do with the cases that come from, I believe, having no CFOs and stuff like that.
Okay. All right.
President Scott,
Yeah.
for the C of O one, I just wanted to chime in briefly and say, I think one of the things we have to do at some point is look at whether or not we have enough inspection and process in place
Right.
to avoid some
Right.
of these challenges.
Right.
I kind of feel like that's a prevention investment up front that we could do as a city that might avoid some of these evictions down the road.
Do any of you recall the meeting that we had with Gary Kirkmeyer about this very same subject. It was before COVID because it wasn't on Zoom and it wasn't recorded that way. But I thought that he did indicate something about the time lag regarding inspections and so forth, which does direct the whole resource issue about having enough inspectors. But I might be misremembering if there is such a word. Do any of you recall that?
It was when Councilmember Lupin and I first came on. It was probably one of our first meetings when we were discussing how we don't have enough inspectors. We went basically half of the inspectors that we had before. I think the biggest issue with that is not only the inspection part, but it's the follow-up. There's not enough follow-up. And I believe that if you speak to most housing providers, they're going to say they want more, inspectors so that we can hold the slumlords accountable to what they're doing to our city. I think everyone is in agreement with this. It's just going to come down to the funding part.
That's really interesting because we're talking about no eviction, no CFO, et cetera. But if it turns out that it's our fault because we're not moving the process along enough, that would be beyond ironic.
Well, I don't think it's our fault that the slumlords aren't renewing. Some of these are 4 or 5 years without having a CFO. I'm interested, I can't remember if I'm remembering this right, but that they have to wait for it to expire in order to renew. And if that's the case, I think we should probably change that around, but I might be remembering that wrong.
Oh,
Well, I guess if I could chime in one more time, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Just thinking about process on our end, if there was a way for our systems to indicate or flag properties that are either expired or on the verge of expiring, and there'd be some direct communication with the property owners about, hey, your CFO is expiring, kind of thing. Because I just going into building blocks, you can get all the data, and to have properties that are 8 years without a CFO is absurd to me.
On the other side, I would love to see a future where we have a inspection process that entails the end of a lease when someone moves out, so that they can see if there's a complete mess up of an apartment and the CFO is coming up due and the landlord knows that they can't get the issues remedied in the meantime. They can speak with the inspector and say, look at what happened. Can I get an extension on this CFO process so that I can fix what needs to be fixed? In the meantime, maybe rent out the other apartments.
Well, CFOs by unit.
Right.
So even if if it was destroyed, if it's not in good condition, you shouldn't be renting
And
it.
it shouldn't rent it. So yeah. Okay. All right. I think I see where we're moving to. Problem is, we got to move more quickly than we've done just to get this stuff, get the questions answered, and get our position resolved, and to face head on any questions that there are regarding resources, and then prioritizing that in line with the other issues that we're facing as a council, as a community, as it were. Okay,
So, Madam President, can I just make a request?
certainly.
So before we do anything on CFOs, can we also have another workshop again with law and with NBD so that we can really go through the CFO process so folks know how it works? I mean, because so somebody was saying that, every unit, and I think somebody was implying, maybe he didn't say it, that every unit in a multi-unit building is inspected for the CFO. That's not how it works. They do a representative sampling. If they see a problem, then they might go after everyone. But in every building, every unit. But it's not every unit in a multi-unit building is inspected for CFO.
But I think the comment was that if one unit is not habitable, it doesn't make the other ones not habitable.
Right, it doesn't, exactly. But then somebody else was saying, it's the CFO is that, and I thought I heard it. Maybe I heard it wrong. that in a multi-unit building, you know, every unit is inspected in a multi-unit building for a CFO. It's not.
The CFO is not by
but
unit
let's-
anyways.
Right, but still, it sounded like somebody was saying that. But let's make sure that we actually understand what our CFO process is. Exactly. So before we talk about any kind of legislative change to it, let's make sure that we understand it. Let's make sure that the information that we're seeing on our systems is actually correct. And let's find out what their plan for remediation is. Maybe there is a plan, maybe there isn't. Maybe there is room for legislation. But sometimes it may well just be, and maybe there is a need for more funding and more inspectors. But let's actually sit down with Gary and Law and have this conversation in depth, a little bit more than a work session.
The CFO is for the property, not for the unit. Or
Yeah, I
per
know.
unit. I know.
Yeah, I know.
I understand, you know, I just want to make sure the
Yeah.
others know.
But the point is, before we start trying to legislate anything, let us make sure we have a thorough understanding of what exists now before we start going forward. Because my concern is, we had for a period of time, we had some folks running around saying, because the state passed a law saying, hey, you know, no CFO, you know, you can't collect rent. And folks were saying, we're running around telling folks that here in the city. That didn't apply to the city of Rochester. But we need to cover that again. As a matter of fact, I believe Councilmember Melendez, you were the main, you brought up the state legislation, and then we got clarification from law. So let's make sure we get that stuff. And if we have to get it, you know, we just have to get it sent around again, let's do that.
Okay, so
Well,
you're,
and Loretta, I would just tack one thing onto that. There was a long time when Judge Dorn was the administrative judge that he talked about a no CFO, no eviction policy with the Housing for All group that could be done by the courts without legislation. And they were deliberating. I don't know what happened. Obviously, they've not chosen to do that. But if we're going to meet with Judge Dorn about anything, I think this is one of the things that we should ask is why, because you know, I there's emails back and forth of him saying, you know, of course, you know, we can do this, but we're talking about it. I'd like to understand what is the reasoning from the court's perspective why they have not done it.
okay. All right, so we'll have to put these meetings in a sequence that makes sense, so that the questions that need to be asked and answered first are scheduled in that fashion, and then we will proceed from there. And we'll do it quickly. Okay? So what is there any place we can go with this? Or are we gonna wind up in the same spot for each of these?
Well, we are a deliberative body. This looks like deliberation.
Comes down to 5 or not, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes the most essential part of 5 or not is this stuff right here. Can we talk about that other? We did the tenant, right? This one here, this 4 opt out of 485. And I can tell you, this is the one I know absolutely least about.
I just want to touch that last point before this number 5. Sorry, if the right to counsel, are we going to give the landlords the right to counsel as well, just to keep it fair? Add that to the list of questions.
If they're city residents.
Just saying, right to counsel should be fair across the board.
Not if the landlord is bringing an eviction forward, if they're choosing to act upon the motion, I don't think that it's government's job to provide them with a lawyer for that.
Because they're bringing the action. And we're talking about defending.
Correct.
Okay. Councilmember Peel, that's not reasonable to you?
I guess, but it's also defending against the courts not allowing them to evict someone and get someone in there that will pay rent. So I can see both sides of that. But I get what you're saying. The prosecution doesn't get a counsel, but I'm just saying, I believe that there's a lot of landlords right now who need some help, and we're not getting our tax revenues from them. We should provide counsel for them as well. I'll speak to the housing tax break programs though. I think there's a better way with this. I know that giving tax breaks is appealing to many developers. I would like to see maybe a low interest loan that we would give them that maybe a bank would not be able to provide on their own. But if it's us backing it as well, then that might be of interest to developers. But I agree that tax breaks for luxury housing it doesn't look good. But, there's not much investment going in at that level from within our own community here in Rochester. So if we don't do that, will developers not come? Is my question. I don't know if they won't come or not. I just think that the city could provide other alternatives like low interest loans for the build out or for the renovations.
Dr. Ogilvy has done work on this, but I can't recall whether it was about housing. She sent us a paper that expounds on it. She's anti-tax break. She believes that the developers will develop with or without that. Now, I know for us in this city, that was not the case for many, many years. I don't know how we've looked at it more recently. Your question, will they come? Will they develop without a break or not? I don't know how that has been asked or answered. But Dr. D.T. Ogilvy.
Yep, I'm sorry, Dr. Ogilvy is more about job providers, not providing them with tax breaks. Not housing. I'm not sure if that's the same though. It might be, but there's no. Dr. Ogilvy is more about providing the employment option or providing the training for employees, so
not in this paper that she's talking about. Okay, it wasn't about training. It actually is about development, because the training part, I didn't even know she did that until we got that most recent thing. But she did that in Newark. I guess she was part of their economic development arm machine. So anybody else on 485?
Just gonna say, I think we have turned that corner where, development downtown is happening at a breakneck pace. And I think it's going to continue to do that, whether we provide the tax break or not. And, I think, going around with, along with what Councilmember Pio was saying, I know that a lot of the housing providers that are not high end and luxury are saying, hey, what about us? And if we could provide tax breaks to them to provide affordable housing, that would be a better use of this kind of a tax break.
I think what they want to see is more of, can I get a grant to fix up the units? Can I get maybe, let's say $5,000 per unit, and I will fix up this building using my own funds. But if I'm provided some funding for this, it would help to keep the rents low. I think that's a better option than an actual tax break, especially for people who are looking to invest in properties for low-income housing here locally. It will help the local developers who are not as big.
So in terms of whether the 485, we should urge for the repeal of 485A. I mean, we're sort of getting back to that directly.
Yeah, this is Miguel. I think I'm one of those individuals that needs a little bit more information. But one of the things I wanted to understand is, does this bring in outside resources in addition to whatever the city puts in? That's just a question. I'm not certain of the answer.
The other part is when you're putting in, let's say, $25 million to develop a property, taxes are going to be due by the time you're done with that renovation or done with that build out. And I think that's the biggest thing is, okay, well, I'm still building this 500 unit building, let's just say, you know, those taxes are due at that time. So we may be able to opt out of that, or maybe extend it, or maybe create a ladder for taxes where it increases over a limited number of years, as opposed to, hey, as long as you provide housing, we're not going to charge, we're going to give you this tax break. How about like a 5-year step up or a 10-year step up and just cap it at that?
Well, we would need to know what 485A is a provision of.
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now, Loretta. It's specifically about converting a, let me see if I can find the exact language here. It's something that was not residential. So it's taking a non-residential property and converting it to a mix of residential and commercial uses specifically. So Katie, please, obviously you could verify that with law, but that's what the New York State website says here, 485A. So I'd be curious to understand. I mean, that's not something that, at least in my 3 and change years on council, that has come to us very often. Certainly it was with downtown. You know, there was a lot of things downtown, like the Metropolitan is the example I think they've used. That all happened, well more than 4 years ago at this point. But I'd be curious.
Probably the Sibley building too would probably
right
gotten
funded.
But
I'd be curious to understand what's on the docket, really. Like there's just, schools maybe. I don't know. But those are the questions I want to ask about that. But it is specifically, according to what I'm looking at right now, it's specifically about converting non-residential property to a mix of residential and commercial uses.
My question on that also would be, how does it drive up rent costs, and where have we seen that? If we're doing a luxury market rate housing in one building, the people that live there can afford it, but maybe the building right next to it could be low income housing. I would like to see how that drives up rent costs in actual action.
Okay, so one of the things that I will do right off the bat is find out what projects have been supported that way. And that will give a better understanding as to how that's been used. And we also would probably be able to determine what the tax implications are on that. Because if it does, the amount of property tax that it brings in sort of outweighs some of the other stuff, it deserves to be viewed in a different way. So we'll have to get more information about that one, because it's got a number of elements to it as well. Okay.
President Scott.
Yes.
In the document there is a link that has some of the most recent projects, and I believe Innovation Square is, I don't want to talk out of turn. I think that one is on there as something on the document.
You said there's a link, because nothing on the document that I got, it doesn't link through, it just.
Yeah, I think Katie that link there.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm trying to open it, 1 second.
Well, what's the general feeling as we plow through this?
My general feeling is I feel good that we're having these conversations. I think we have some work to do, clearly. And there's some items we'll probably agree on. There might be some things that we need to do some more work on, but I feel like we need to continue this conversation and move it.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so we've got a lot on our plates that we're gonna need to address and move quickly, just so we can get this going. It's been bouncing around now for a couple of years at least, I think, but, and I don't know whether the need is more extreme now or this is just an awkward time, given the state of the housing market and the economy, along with the pandemic and all of that, that may make it even more urgent. But we do have to address it. So we'll get things on your calendar, and I hope that you'll exercise some flexibility so that we could have these discussions that are so critical to our ability to move forward. Agreed?
Agreed.
Right, thank you all. So what time is it and what is our next item?
It is 1:47, and our next item would be committee reports.
You all have 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or do we need to wrap?
I have until 2.
All right, let's go through the committee reports right quick. I'm not looking at anything. I don't see it, the agenda, so.
I'll put it up.
Okey dokey. Oh, Councilmember Evans, it's 3 on 3. You probably haven't met with anybody, right?
Yeah, we had a 3-on-3 virtual last week. We talked a lot about busing. The school district was on, so obviously that remains a challenge for them. But I know RTS should be given a lot of credit for stepping up to the plate and helping really fill in the gap for those guys. So I'm happy to see that they stepped up to the plate for them. So yeah. So that's that. And then on finance, I mean, we had committees already, so not much more to add than what we discussed in the finance committee on Thursday. So those are the main things. And then the other thing on 3-on-3 is that we are, we should be circulating soon this joint report that we did with the county, the city, and the school district on where we spent the first batch of CARES funding. So it's a little cool, instructive, educational thing for the community that I'll make sure Courtney gets out to everybody. And it has with how the county spent their money, how the city spent their money, and how the school district spent their money in that first round. So that could be good. And then in terms of the convention center, nothing new to add. I was feeling good, and then the Delta variant hit. So a lot of the events that were going to take place in the fall are now being shuttered. So so folks that don't want to take this thing seriously, I mean, it's affecting people's pockets, and it's affecting a lot of working people in our community that work at the convention center. And I think just people need to understand that. So hopefully we'll have some better news soon. But the convention center has not had a large event since probably the last week of February of 2020. So yeah. And we're headed into 22. So lost economic revenue for the city, as well as the convention center. So hopefully things will turn around soon.
Okay, MBD, I was going to link the committee report to the boards and commissions, but Mike, MBD and Redcoat. Councilmember Patterson.
I believe Councilmember Patterson logged off.
Okay, Councilmember Gruber, we got PPW, ABC, Peace Village, and Raise. You can do those quick.
He also had to sign off.
Okay, then we won't do that one either. And the VP is not here. So I think we got Board of Ethics. I was not at the Board of Ethics meeting on, I think it met Tuesday. So I'm not sure. I don't have a report for that. So
I
having
could
said
update
that,
you on that if you wanted, President Scott.
sure.
The complaint about myself, they're moving forward with a technical violation, and Secretary Weir is typing that up to be voted on next meeting. The rest of the complaints, they decided they needed more information on, so those will be discussed at the next meeting.
The rest of the complaints, you mean the
There was
remaining?
the sub complaint about me and then the PAB. So they just kind of discussed how they didn't have the information that they needed to make a decision. I think there was some question about whether or not the PAB was had to adhere to the code of ethics, depending on what branch of government. So there'll be more discussion on that next time.
Okay.
And I don't
Okay.
have an update from the crisis intervention.
Katie, you've got something from?
Yep. So Councilmember Gruber will be sending around a letter of support. It is for the Clean Slate Act, which is regarding the sealing of criminal records. And I don't want to attempt to explain it because it is a little complicated, but the letter does clearly explain the law. It is about
Senator Cooney's thing, about the marijuana charges?
no, I think it's more broad. Beth, do you know? Because Beth was actually the one that drafted this up.
Yes, it is more broad. It does not affect sexual offenders, but it does affect other, there's a period of time, I think it's 3 years for misdemeanors and then 7 years for felonies. So it's the whole how former inmates are impacted in terms of finding housing and jobs and so forth. Once they've served their time and are back in their community, can their records be sealed after these periods of time so that they can move on with their lives? I think that's what it's attempting to address.
They also wouldn't be under probation or parole anymore. So it'd be people that have served their time and completed any probation or parole.
Okay.
So I will send that around.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all. Thanks.
President Scott, I just have
Yes.
one update. Board of Health.
Well, oh, I'm sorry. I
It's
missed
okay.
you. Where is it at? Here it
It's
is.
at the
Okay.
bottom there. So we did meet last week. Obviously, the big discussion, to reiterate what Councilmember Evans said, is the COVID variant, the Delta variant, and how it's spreading rapidly here in Monroe County. So, just want to reiterate to the public, do everything you were doing when the pandemic first started. Mask up, wash your hands, and even then, it may not be enough. So just be extra cautious. I mean, I'll tell my story briefly. I went away on a trip. I came back, and a few members of my family contracted COVID as well. So it's a very serious and highly communicable disease in terms of its spread this time with the Delta variant. So we need to be extra cautious.
Well, I'm glad that you're coming along okay. And the baby's okay.
I'm good. We're good here now, but
Yeah.
I can't stress it enough to the public.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that.
No one responded to my competition, just saying,
What
To
was the
keep-
competition?
to get people healthy, to get them in motion, lose some weight, decrease their bad health. I would love to go district versus district for a weight loss competition.
But you didn't reply to my rebuttal, which is that weight doesn't determine your health.
True, but this is something that's
So
good.
if we're gonna go for lowering cholesterol, I'm all in.
Yeah, let's add that in.
Yeah. Okay, so we're all set for now, and we can talk about that on Wednesday when we do our retreat. How about that?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Again, thank you all. We'll,
Thank you.